A strip of water so narrow you could cross parts of it in less than an hour. Yet every single day it helps power cities, factories, and economies across the planet. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and for the next 30 days nothing gets through. Not because the world has run out of oil, but because the world's busiest energy highway has suddenly gone silent. The first signs wouldn't be empty gas stations. They'd appear on trading screens in London, Tokyo, and New York, then ripple outward to airlines, supermarkets, shipping companies, and eventually to ordinary people filling up their cars. All because of one narrow passage that most of the world never thinks about. So what really happens when one of the most important choke points on Earth goes silent for an entire month? Every morning, before most of the world has finished breakfast, a silent procession begins. One after another, giant oil tankers enter a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman. Each ship is carrying enough energy to fuel entire cities. Together, they form one of the busiest and most valuable shipping routes on Earth. From the deck, it feels routine. For the captain, it's another scheduled voyage. For the crew, another day at sea. But what looks ordinary here is quietly powering life thousands of miles away. On a map, the Strait of Hormuz doesn't seem extraordinary. At its narrowest point, it's only about 21 miles, or 34 kilometers, wide, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and beyond that, the open ocean. Yet every single day, millions of barrels of crude oil pass through this narrow gateway from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. Alongside them, enormous LNG carriers leave Qatar, transporting natural gas that heats homes, powers factories, and keeps electrical grids running across continents. To most of us, these ships are invisible. But their cargo isn't. Behind the fuel in your car, the package arriving at your doorstep, the airplane climbing into the sky, and the electricity keeping countless industries alive, there's a good chance the energy behind it passed through this single stretch of water. That's why, despite decades of wars, regional tensions, and political crises, one objective has remained remarkably consistent. Keep the strait open. Because the global economy isn't built on oil alone. It's built on the assumption that the oil will always keep moving. And like every assumption, its importance is only truly understood the moment it stops being true. It begins with something almost unbelievable. Not an empty oil field. Not a worldwide shortage. Just silence. At sunrise, the first tanker approaching the strait slows to a stop, then another. Within hours, dozens of massive vessels begin waiting outside the entrance, stretching across the Gulf like a floating traffic jam visible from space. Captains receive the same instruction. Hold position. No one knows whether the disruption will last hours or weeks. That uncertainty becomes the first crisis. Around the world, financial markets react before governments do. Oil traders aren't buying today's supply anymore, they're trying to predict tomorrow's. As fear spreads across trading floors, prices climb sharply. Every new headline moves the market because uncertainty is often more expensive than certainty itself. Thousands of miles away, dispatchers begin rerouting flights. Refinery engineers study inventory screens. Shipping managers scramble to contact vessels already at sea. No one is asking whether the world still has oil. They're asking a far more urgent question. When will the next shipment arrive? Inside energy ministries, emergency meetings begin before breakfast. Military commanders monitor satellite feeds. Shipping companies decide whether hundreds of vessels should wait, reroute, or turn back altogether. Meanwhile, millions of people continue their normal morning. Parents drive their children to school. Factories open their doors. Airliners take off on schedule. Most have no idea that one of the world's busiest energy corridors has suddenly gone quiet. That's because modern economies don't stop the moment supplies are interrupted. They keep moving for a while. The fuel is still in storage tanks. The gas stations are still open. The lights are still on. But somewhere beneath the surface, an invisible clock has already started ticking. And with every passing hour, the world moves one step closer to discovering that the real danger was never running out of oil overnight. It was discovering how completely modern life depends on oil that never stops moving. For the first week, the global economy has been running on momentum, on fuel already in storage, ships already at sea, and the hope that tomorrow will bring better news. Now that hope is beginning to fade. The world's largest oil-consuming nations start releasing crude from their strategic petroleum reserves, vast underground stockpiles built for moments exactly like this. The goal isn't to replace every missing barrel. It's to buy time. Because time has quietly become the world's most valuable commodity. Across Asia, Europe, and beyond, refinery operators begin calculating how long existing supplies will last. Some plants can process crude from different regions with relative ease. Others were designed around specific grades of Middle Eastern oil, making a sudden switch far more complicated than simply buying from another supplier. Out at sea, uncertainty has become its own traffic jam. Some tankers remain anchored outside the strait, their crews watching the horizon each morning, hoping today will be the day they're cleared to move. Others turn away entirely, beginning much longer voyages toward producers in the United States, Brazil, or West Africa. Those cargoes will eventually help, but every extra mile means higher costs, longer delivery times, and fewer ships available for the next journey. The effects slowly begin reaching everyday life. Airlines quietly adjust flight schedules as jet fuel becomes more expensive. Shipping companies raise freight rates. Manufacturers pay more to move raw materials and finished goods. For most families, the first warning isn't an empty gas station. It's a receipt. A tank of fuel costs more than it did last week. Groceries become slightly more expensive because every truck delivering food is burning costlier diesel. Plane tickets quietly rise. The crisis hasn't stopped the world. Instead, it's exposing something far more fragile. The global economy isn't held together by endless supplies of energy. It's held together by the certainty that those supplies will arrive exactly when they're needed. After 7 days, that certainty is beginning to disappear. And if the strait remains closed for another 3 weeks, the world won't just be asking how expensive energy has become. It will be asking whether the system it has relied on for decades can keep working at all. 30 days have passed. Somewhere above the Arabian Sea, a satellite image tells the entire story. Hundreds of tankers are scattered across the water. Some are still waiting. Others have turned away, beginning journeys thousands of miles longer than anyone originally planned. The strait hasn't just delayed ships. It has forced the world's supply routes to bend around a single missing link. By now, strategic oil reserves have softened the initial shock, but they were never designed to replace the uninterrupted flow of millions of barrels every single day. Governments face an uncomfortable reality. Every barrel released today is one that won't be available if another crisis begins tomorrow. Then comes the surprising realization. The biggest problem isn't that the world has run out of oil. It's that the world's economy was built on predictability. Factories don't simply need fuel. They need to know exactly when that fuel will arrive. Shipping companies don't just move cargo. They synchronize thousands of deliveries across continents. Break that rhythm for a month, and delays begin multiplying through industries that have nothing to do with the Persian Gulf. So the world begins adjusting. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates push as much oil as possible through pipelines that bypass the strait. Producers in the United States, Brazil, Norway, and West Africa send additional cargo wherever they can. But geography cannot be negotiated. Longer voyages mean fewer deliveries. Fewer deliveries mean higher transportation costs. And higher transportation costs quietly find their way into almost everything people buy. Inside government offices, priorities begin to shift. Projects that once seemed years away suddenly become urgent. New pipelines, LNG terminals, expanded strategic reserves, renewable energy, nuclear power. Not because any one solution can replace the strait overnight, but because every additional route, every new source of energy, and every extra layer of resilience means the next disruption won't be quite as severe. For ordinary families, life hasn't stopped. The lights are still on. The supermarkets are still open. But the crisis has changed something less visible. It has exposed how many ordinary moments, a morning commute, an online order arriving on time, a factory opening its doors each day, depend on supply chains stretching across oceans. The Strait of Hormuz may be only a narrow passage on the map. But after 30 days, it has revealed something much bigger. The modern world isn't fragile because resources are scarce. It's fragile because so much of modern life depends on everything arriving exactly when it's supposed to. And once that certainty disappears, getting it back is far more difficult than anyone imagined. Then, almost as quietly as it began, the silence ends. The first tanker enters the strait under the watch of naval escorts. Behind it, another follows, then another. A shipping lane that had stood still for 30 days begins moving once more. For the crews on board, it's the end of an anxious wait. For ports across the world, it's the beginning of an enormous recovery. Hundreds of delayed cargoes must still reach their destinations. Refineries work around the clock to rebuild inventories. Supply chains don't reset overnight. They untangle one shipment at a time. Oil prices begin to settle. Markets become calmer. But confidence is slower to return. Because some lessons can't be forgotten. 30 days was long enough to change how governments, businesses, and entire industries think about energy security. Plans that once felt optional suddenly become urgent. Strategic oil reserves are expanded. New pipelines are proposed. Investment in renewable energy, nuclear power, and alternative transport routes gains new urgency, not because they can replace oil overnight, but because every additional option reduces dependence on a single choke point. Businesses learn their own lessons. Manufacturers rethink just-in-time supply chains. Shipping companies diversify routes wherever geography allows. Energy importing nations search for suppliers that are farther apart, even if the cost is higher. The closure didn't create these conversations. It accelerated them. And perhaps that's the real answer to our question. What happens if the Strait of Hormuz closes for 30 days? The world doesn't stop. It adjusts. Painfully, expensively, unevenly. But it adapts. Because history has shown that economies are remarkably resilient. The real danger isn't disruption itself. It's believing that disruption can never happen. The Strait of Hormuz is more than a narrow channel between two coastlines. It's a reminder that modern civilization rests on countless invisible connections, shipping lanes, ports, pipelines, undersea cables, and supply chains that quietly support everyday life. Most of the time, we never notice them. They're simply there, doing their job, until one of them falls silent. And that's the quiet truth this 30-day closure reveals. The strength of the global economy isn't measured by how much oil the world can produce. It's measured by how easily that oil can keep moving. Because sometimes the smallest places on the map are the ones holding the entire world together.